7 Johnny Carson guests who snapped on live TV. For 30 years, Johnny Carson was America's favorite nighttime companion. Behind his warm smile and easygoing charm, however, lurked a meticulous professional who demanded absolute control of his television domain. While most celebrities understood the unwritten rules of The Tonight Show, be funny, be engaging, but always follow Johnny's lead, some guests spectacularly failed to read the room. They came to promote movies, albums, or simply themselves. But whether fueled by liquid courage, inflated egos, or simple miscalculation, these celebrities crossed the invisible line that separated amusing Carson's audience from shocking them into stunned silence. What makes these meltdowns particularly fascinating isn't just the car crash spectacle of watching famous people implode on national television. It's Carson's masterful attempts to maintain control. The tight smile that never quite reached his eyes, the nervous glance toward Ed McMahon, the desperate attempt to salvage segments as they spiraled beyond rescue. While countless celebrities had forgettable appearances on Carson's couch, these 7 created moments so uncomfortable, so boundary-crossing, and so completely at odds with the show's carefully maintained tone that they become legendary in late-night television history. From an iconic actress who turned a promotional appearance into a screaming match to a beloved comedian who hijacked the show uninvited to the A-list pop star who left America's most unflappable host visibly flustered. These are the guests who didn't just push Carson's buttons, they stomped on them while America watched in shock. Let's begin with the Material Girl herself, whose 1987 appearance traded Carson's trademark, sophisticated wit for something far more provocative than NBC censors were prepared to handle. LY. But what am I wearing? Yeah, if I went into a lingerie shop and I wanted to buy one of those for somebody. Come on, not for me, but for somebody, they'd probably what would I call it? I mean, it's called a bouillier. A bouillier. MHM. 1 Madonna. The Material Girl gets too material. When Madonna appeared on The Tonight Show in 1987, she wasn't yet the global icon she would become, but she was well on her way, riding high on her Who's That Girl tour, and increasingly notorious for pushing boundaries. What Carson and his producers expected was a playful but professional interview. What they got was something entirely different. Madonna arrived on set wearing what could generously be described as lingerie-inspired attire. Black lace, fishnet stockings, and an attitude that made it clear she wasn't there to play by Carson's rules. From the moment she settled onto the famous couch, she transformed from guest to provocateur. I remember the studio going completely silent when she walked out, recalled NBC Page, who was present that night. This wasn't the usual Tonight Show outfit. This was Madonna bringing her concert persona to late-night television, and you could feel the producers panicking. Rather than engaging in Carson's usual gentle back-and-forth banter, Madonna immediately took control, flirting aggressively with the host, making suggestive comments, and deliberately pushing religious and sexual boundaries that were still taboo for network television in the 1980s. When Carson attempted his trademark subtle innuendo, Madonna responded with explicit comments that left the host visibly searching for a way to redirect the conversation. His famous poker face cracked several times as Madonna made references to her sex life that had the censors hovering over the delay button. Johnny laughed, but he never invited her back, noted a longtime Tonight Show producer. What viewers at home didn't see was Carson's reaction during commercial breaks. He wasn't angry. Johnny rarely showed anger, but he was clearly annoyed that she'd hijacked the segment and put him in the unusual position of being the one trying to tone things down. The audience reactions split along generational lines. Younger viewers thrilled at Madonna's rebellion. Older viewers shocked by her deliberate flouting of late-night decorum. What no one disputed was that Madonna had created exactly the provocative moment she intended, using Carson's show as a platform while completely disregarding its usual tone. While the appearance boosted Madonna's reputation for boundary pushing, it effectively ended her relationship with Carson. Despite multiple album and film releases in the following years, she never returned to his couch, making her one of the few major stars of the era who was quietly banned from the show, not for saying too little, but for saying too much. Carson's cigarette box. I broke his box. I broke Carson. 2. Don Rickles. The night the insult comic went too far. Don Rickles and Johnny Carson shared one of late night's most enduring friendships. Rickles was a frequent guest whose appearances typically followed a familiar beloved pattern. He'd insult Carson mercilessly. Carson would laugh harder than anyone, and audiences would delight in their chemistry. But one infamous night in 1976, Rickles broke more than just Carson's comedic rhythm. He broke an actual piece of television history. The trouble began during Rickles' scheduled appearance the previous evening. While Carson was briefly offset, Rickles decided to sit in the host chair. Not unusual for a guest to do during a commercial break. What was unusual was what happened next. Rickles snapped the cigarette box on Carson's desk, a treasured gift from NBC that had been with Carson for years. The following day, with Rickles not scheduled to appear, but filming his sitcom CPO Sharkey on a nearby NBC stage, Carson displayed the broken cigarette box and playfully complained about Rickles' carelessness. What happened next shocked even seasoned NBC employees. Without warning or invitation, Rickles burst onto the set in full Navy costume from his sitcom, interrupting Carson mid-segment. For the next several minutes, television viewers witnessed an unplanned, unscripted Rickles hurricane as he seized control of the show. It was funny until it wasn't, recalled a camera operator who worked that day. At first, everyone was laughing. The surprise appearance, Rickles in costume, his quick wit. But there was a moment where you could see something shift in Johnny's expression. Rickles wasn't just doing his usual insult routine. He was legitimately hijacking the show. Rickles didn't just interrupt. He took over, grabbing Carson's desk, shouting across the set, and delivering a relentless stream of insults that went beyond his usual playful jabs. While Carson maintained his professional demeanor on air, laughing and playing along, backstage staff reported that he was genuinely angry about the boundary crossing. Johnny was extremely protective of the show's format and professionalism, explained a former Tonight Show producer. Even with friends like Rickles, there were limits. Coming on unannounced in costume and taking over wasn't just breaking the fourth wall. It was demolishing the entire structure of how the show operated. The segment became legendary precisely because it represented something audiences rarely saw: Carson temporarily losing control of his own show. Though the two remained friends, insiders noted that Carson was cooler toward Rickles for several months afterward, a subtle but meaningful reaction from television's most unflappable host. What made the incident particularly remarkable was that it came from Rickles, not a boundary-pushing newcomer or a troubled star, but one of Carson's most trusted and frequent guests. It demonstrated that even within late night's most comfortable relationships, there were lines that shouldn't be crossed, especially on live television. I've never had anything to do with sex and that sort of thing. Oliver, that's Don't Do This. Don't do this film. Well, you should see the cows. 3. Oliver Reed. The interview that became a cautionary tale. British actor Oliver Reed had already earned a reputation for wild behavior and heavy drinking long before his 1975 Tonight Show appearance. But when he arrived at NBC's Burbank studios to promote the film Royal Flash, few could have predicted just how dramatically his interview would derail. From the moment Reed walked on stage, it was clear something was wrong. His gait was unsteady, his eyes unfocused, and when he sat down beside Carson, the scent of alcohol was reportedly so strong that crew members could smell it from several feet away. He came to promote a movie and torch his own career,
said a Tonight Show staffer who witnessed the appearance. We had dealt with guests who'd had a few drinks before, but Reed was on another level entirely. You could see Carson immediately realized he was in trouble. Carson, ever the professional, attempted to guide Reed through standard promotional questions about the film, but Reed's responses quickly veered into incoherence. He slurred his words, interrupted Carson repeatedly, and became increasingly hostile when the host tried to redirect the conversation. What made the segment particularly uncomfortable was Reed's unpredictable shifts in tone. One moment he would be charming, the next belligerent. He alternated between attempting to tell rambling, disconnected stories, and suddenly challenging Carson with aggressive questions that broke the show's usual conversational rhythm. Carson had a remarkable ability to handle difficult guests. But even he had his limits, noted a longtime NBC executive. You could see him calculating in real time. How long could the segment possibly continue? How could he end it without making the situation even worse? It was like watching a chess master realize he's in a game he can't win. The audience's reaction transformed as the segment progressed. Initial laughter at Reed's eccentric behavior gave way to nervous chuckles, then uncomfortable silence as it became impossible to ignore that they were watching a man whose inebriation had crossed from amusing to concerning. Carson finally cut the segment short, a rare move for a host who prided himself on never making guests look bad, no matter how difficult the circumstances. The incident became infamous in Tonight Show history, with Carson reportedly telling producers afterward, "Let's not do that again." For Reed, the appearance had lasting consequences. Already struggling to establish himself in Hollywood despite success in British films, his behavior on America's flagship talk show effectively ended his chances for U.S. stardom. Studios, already wary of his reputation, now had videotaped evidence of the risks involved in casting him. The segment exists now as both entertainment industry legend and cautionary tale. A reminder that even the most controlled television environment can unravel when a guest arrives unprepared to meet its basic standards of behavior. And they were on the gallows, each one of them, for over 20 minutes before their hearts stopped beating. I mean, it's a really an unbelievably horrendous thing to watch. It must be for Truman Capote, literary genius to late-night liability. When literary giant Truman Capote appeared on The Tonight Show in 1980, he brought with him both his brilliance and his demons. By then, the author of In Cold Blood and Breakfast at Tiffany's was already deep into the substance abuse issues that would eventually contribute to his death, a fact that became painfully apparent during his disastrous interview with Carson. From the moment Capote settled into the guest chair, viewers could see something was wrong. His speech was slurred, his movements erratic, and his train of thought nearly impossible to follow. Carson, himself, an intellectual who genuinely admired literary figures, attempted valiantly to guide Capote through coherent conversation. But the author seemed determined to derail every question. From literary legend to late-night liability, commented a writer who worked for Carson during this period. Johnny had tremendous respect for Capote's work and wanted to give him a platform to show his brilliance. Instead, we got a man who could barely string sentences together, making increasingly bizarre statements that had the control room in a panic. What made the appearance particularly uncomfortable was Capote's determination to discuss provocative topics, making strange, inappropriate comments about politics and sexuality that violated the show's family-friendly standards. Several times, Carson attempted to redirect the conversation to safer territory, only to have Capote circle back to controversial subjects. The audience, expecting witty literary banter from one of America's most celebrated authors, instead witnessed something closer to performance art. Capote rambling incoherently, occasionally producing flashes of his famous wit before descending again into nonsensical tangents. Carson was remarkably patient, recalled a camera operator who worked that night. With most guests in that condition, he would have found a way to end the segment early. But I think he kept hoping Capote would suddenly snap into focus and become the brilliant conversationalist he could be. That moment never came. Though Carson never publicly criticized Capote afterward, the author was never invited back to The Tonight Show. A telling decision from a host who generally gave troubled guests second chances. The appearance marked a sad milestone in Capote's public decline, offering television viewers a glimpse of how far the once sharp social observer had fallen. What made the incident particularly poignant was the contrast between Capote's earlier Carson appearances, where he had dazzled with witty observations and literary insights, and this final troubled interview. For viewers familiar with Capote's work, the disconnect between his brilliant prose and his incoherent television persona was nothing short of heartbreaking. The segment stands as one of late-night television's most